When a gang of men rolled onto a black farmer's land with steel in their boots and arrogance in their eyes, they saw only what they wanted to see: an aging man standing alone in a field, outnumbered, outgunned, and already halfway beaten. To them, he was just another name on a deed, just another soul they could scare into silence. What they didn't see was the soldier beneath the soil-stained shirt, a retired Delta Force commander with the discipline of war etched into his bones and the quiet patience of a man who knew how to end a fight before it began. What began as a show of force would ignite a movement, one that would tear open a hidden network of hate, unite a fractured town, and prove that the roots they tried to rip out ran far deeper than they ever imagined. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe. The sun slid over the horizon like a slow-burning torch, casting long amber shadows across rows of green that rolled out like a patchwork quilt. The land was quiet in the way sacred places are quiet, not because nothing moved, but because everything had a rhythm. The wind bent the corn stalks just so. The birds called from the power lines in a familiar tune, and the red dirt underfoot, warm and cracked in places, whispered of generations past who had knelt to tend it. Elijah Briggs stood on his porch with a mug of black coffee, eyes scanning the edge of his property where the morning mist still clung to the earth like breath. He was tall and broad-shouldered, not soft like some men grew with age. Time had refined him, hardened him where it counted. His frame still carried the precision of a soldier, and beneath the calm of his dark eyes was something steel-cold and deeply trained. Though he never boasted of what he'd done, folks around town knew him as the man who came back from the military and refused to sell. Most of them had no idea what that really meant. They didn't know he'd served in Delta Force, didn't know how many doors he'd kicked in overseas, how many missions he'd led that never made the news. Eli liked it that way. He had no interest in talking about war. The farm was his piece, passed down from his grandfather, who'd once picked cotton on land he later owned outright. Eli had returned not for rest, but to protect what his family had built with calloused hands and stubborn faith. Down the dirt road that twisted like a lazy snake through the trees, the rumble of a truck broke the stillness. Eli didn't flinch, but his eyes narrowed as a white pickup rolled slow past his gate. No plates, blacked-out windows, the kind of vehicle that didn't belong here. Not on a Sunday morning, when the church bells hadn't even rung yet. It didn't stop, just crawled past, tires crackling over gravel, then disappeared back into the trees like a ghost refusing to speak. It was the third time he'd seen that truck in a week. He sipped his coffee and said nothing. Later, while checking the irrigation lines along the east field, he found an old flyer flapping against the fence post. The wind had caught it, wedging it between rusted wires. He peeled it off. The paper was thick, printed in bold red ink with slogans meant to stir the wrong kind of pride. "Preserve the heritage," it read. "Protect the homeland." At the bottom, a burning cross watermark faintly glowed beneath the words. No name, no number. Just an invitation to fear. Eli folded the flyer without a word, slipped it into his back pocket, and kept walking. By the time he circled back to the barn, a familiar face stood waiting. Pastor Roy, an elder from the town's small black congregation, leaned against his truck, hat in hand. "You seen the flyers?" he asked without preamble. Eli nodded. "Found one this morning. They put some on the church doors, too. Taped 'em up like they bowled now." "They are," Eli said plainly. The pastor hesitated, his voice low. "Ain't just you. The Walkers, the Harrisons, even old Miss Liza, all getting these notes. And late-night knocks. Lights shine through windows. Intimidation." Eli's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, just looked out toward the fence line. The pastor watched him. "I know you've been quiet since you came back, but you feel what's shifting, don't you?" "I feel it," Eli said. "Same way you feel a storm coming up under your boots before the clouds even show." Pastor Roy exhaled and nodded slowly. "You let me know if you need anything." "I will," Eli said. though he wouldn't. That evening, just before dusk laid its soft hand on the land, Eli walked the perimeter one last time. He stopped at the north field, his favorite stretch, where the soil was deepest and most forgiving. But something was wrong. The gate had been tampered with. One of the posts was bent. Wire snipped. Not torn like an animal would do. Clean. Surgical. Someone had been here. He followed the faint trail, broken grass, disturbed dust, and found hoof prints near the pond. One of his horses, Sweet Bay, was missing. Eli stood there for a long time, the fading light reflecting off his still frame. His mind didn't run wild. It calculated, assessed, processed, not panic, preparation. This wasn't random. This was the opening move, and they had no idea who they were playing with. Morning came again, wrapped in gray clouds, as though the sky itself knew something wasn't right. Eli stepped out onto his porch, as he had every day since returning home, eyes scanning the fields, senses attuned to the slightest shifts. The peaceful rhythm of the farm had changed overnight, now pulsing with subtle danger. He hadn't slept much, spending the dark hours of the night repairing the fence and scouring nearby woods for Sweet Bay. He'd found her at dawn, grazing nervously by the creek, jittery, as though she too knew they were no longer safe. Clara brought him fresh coffee, lingering quietly at his side. "You've got that look again," she said softly, her voice full of gentle worry. "What look is that?" Eli asked, taking the mug and letting the warmth seep into his tired hands. "The look you had every time you came home from deployment," she answered, brushing her fingers over his knuckles. "Like you're calculating your next move." He met her eyes, knowing there was no use hiding the truth. "I've been feeling something coming for a long time. Now it's here." Before Clara could respond, the distant sound of engines echoed down the dirt road, louder than before. Angrier, Eli tensed, placing the mug aside. 3 vehicles crested the hill. A white truck he recognized, flanked by 2 others, their oversized tires crunching gravel and kicking up dust like a cavalry charge. "Go inside," Eli said calmly. Clara hesitated briefly, but obeyed, knowing when Eli meant it. He stepped forward slowly, down the porch steps to stand defiantly in front of the driveway. The trucks skidded to a stop a short distance away, engines rumbling aggressively before cutting off into tense silence. 6 men climbed out of the trucks, their movements deliberate, measured, and intimidating by design. Eli took careful note of each one, from the tall, lean leader dressed in faded denim and a flannel shirt to the youngest at the back, visibly nervous, eyes darting anxiously as though questioning why he'd come. They spread out slowly, forming a half-circle designed to box Eli in and emphasize their control of the space around him. "You must be Briggs," the leader drawled casually, tipping back his worn baseball cap. His cold blue eyes flicked over Eli dismissively, a thin smile playing across his lips, clearly accustomed to exerting dominance without resistance. "Name's Caleb Knox. Heard about you. Heard a lot about you, too," Eli replied evenly, meeting Caleb's gaze steadily and defiantly. "None of it good," Caleb chuckled, a dry, mocking sound, exchanging amused glances with his men, as though Eli were merely entertainment. "Let's not start on the wrong foot now. We're here neighborly-like. Just want to have ourselves a friendly chat. You're on my land," Eli reminded him firmly, his voice steady but edged with steel. "I didn't invite you." Caleb raised his hands in mock surrender, feigning innocence. "Now hold on, Briggs. Me and my boys, we represent folks interested in making sure this community stays, well, how it's supposed to be. Peaceful. Familiar. Folks around here prefer things. Traditional, you understand." "You mean white?" Eli interjected quietly, his voice heavy with restrained anger. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly, an ugly glint flickering beneath his carefully composed demeanor. His smile sharpened, losing its earlier pretense of warmth. "You people always jump to conclusions," he sneered softly, deliberately emphasizing the phrase "you people." "We're businessmen. "We've got a generous offer for you, Briggs. More money than you'd probably ever make farming. More than someone like you could ever expect to earn, honestly." Eli clenched his jaw, his eyes flashing dangerously, refusing to rise to the bait. He shook his head slowly, deliberately. "My land isn't for sale, Knox. Not to you, not to anyone. Everything's for sale." Caleb pressed, his voice harder now, tinged unmistakably with derision, "especially for someone like yourself. Truth is, you're lucky we're even offering. You ought to show some gratitude. There's no offer you could make that I'd ever consider." Eli answered steadily, refusing to break eye contact, refusing to be cowed. A heavy silence stretched painfully between them, filled with unspoken threats. Caleb's men shifted restlessly, casting hostile glances toward Eli. Caleb stepped closer, his voice dropping low and filled with venomous contempt. "You think you're special because you've got yourself some land and an attitude?" Caleb whispered harshly, barely controlling his hatred now. "But there's a natural order around here, Briggs, and you and your kind don't belong in it. Accidents happen. Things catch fire. Livestock goes missing. Next thing you know, this dirt patch won't be worth nothing at all. Are you threatening me, Knox?" Eli's voice remained ice-cold, the words measured and sharp as blades. "No threats," Caleb said mockingly, smiling bitterly. "Just friendly advice, from neighbor to neighbor. Think real carefully before you refuse." Eli took a deliberate step forward, close enough that Caleb instinctively retreated, caught momentarily off guard by the quiet, determined force radiating from the man before him. "Let me give you some advice," Eli said calmly, each word deliberately articulated with dangerous intent. "Leave my property, and don't ever come back. That's your only warning." Caleb's jaw tightened, his gaze smoldering with barely suppressed rage, but he didn't challenge Eli further. Instead, he snapped his fingers, signaling sharply to his men, who climbed reluctantly back into their trucks, murmuring angrily among themselves. Engines roared to life, a harsh, furious sound, and the vehicles tore out of Eli's driveway, tires kicking up choking clouds of dust as they sped away. Clara reappeared quietly, stepping beside Eli, her eyes wide with concern as she watched the retreating vehicles vanish down the road. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm thinking we need to prepare," Eli answered grimly, his gaze hardening, determined and resolute. "That wasn't just a warning, Clara. It was a declaration of war." Night fell quickly, heavy and dark, blanketing the farm in shadow. Eli didn't sleep, couldn't sleep. Every creak of wood, every rustle of grass heightened his senses. His mind drifted back to past deployments, the silence before combat, nights spent waiting for enemies who moved in darkness, just like this. A distant crackle snapped him from his thoughts. He rose swiftly, instincts fully alert, recognizing the glow flickering from the barn's direction. Without hesitation, Eli bolted outside, sprinting toward the brightening flames consuming the structure. Heat radiated fiercely, smoke rising in choking waves. The barn was already too far gone to save. Clara ran outside, eyes wide with horror, pulling a shawl tight around her shoulders. "Eli, no!" He stopped her gently, holding her back from the inferno. "Stay here. Call the fire department, though I doubt they'll hurry." "Who did this?" she whispered, eyes filling with angry tears. "We know exactly who," Eli answered grimly, staring at the roaring flames, his jaw tight with barely controlled fury. "And they just made their second move." Eli left Clara at the house, entering the small tool shed untouched by flames. In the shadows at the back, behind tools and farming equipment, was a locked metal cabinet. He opened it carefully, the hinges protesting quietly. Inside lay an old friend, a matte black tactical rifle, meticulously cleaned and maintained. It had been years since he'd touched it, but muscle memory took hold as he loaded it smoothly and steady despite his rage. He stepped outside, eyes scanning the perimeter methodically. Smoke billowed upward, blotting out stars. The peaceful silence of the land he loved had been replaced by the familiar chaos of war. Eli knew this wasn't random intimidation. This was carefully orchestrated terror. They'd made their move. Now it was his turn. He'd been out of this fight for years, but war had found him again. The enemy thought they had chosen an easy target, unaware they'd unleashed something far deadlier than they could possibly imagine. By sunrise, the remains of Eli's barn stood smoldering, twisted beams like blackened ribs against a pale dawn sky. Smoke lingered, drifting slowly across the fields as though reluctant to leave, a grim reminder that peace had fled this land. Eli, rifle in hand, stood at the fence, eyes scanning the horizon. The night had slipped away, carrying any illusion of safety with it. His land was now a battlefield. War had found its way home. Word traveled quickly through the small black community. By mid-morning, vehicles lined Eli's driveway. Neighbors, farmers, and friends stepping cautiously from their trucks, faces heavy with worry and disbelief. Clara stood quietly beside Eli, greeting them softly, eyes reflecting strength and compassion even in crisis. Pastor Roy arrived first, somber and tired-looking, followed closely by old Miss Liza, a small woman whose soft voice often carried the wisdom of generations. Families Eli had known all his life stood in scattered groups, casting anxious glances toward the charred ruins of the barn, whispers hushed as though the violence might return at any moment. "Eli," Pastor Roy began, clasping his hands tightly, "I hoped we'd never see this day again." "It's here," Eli replied evenly, not turning his gaze from the distant tree line, as if anticipating another attack at any second. "I spoke with the sheriff earlier," Roy said hesitantly, a hint of bitterness in his voice. "He called it an accident, Eli. Suggested maybe faulty wiring." Eli's jaw tightened, eyes narrowing at the insult. "We both know better than that." Pastor Roy nodded slowly. "I told him that. He didn't like it. Said we shouldn't stir trouble. Advised me to talk some sense into you and the others." Eli's eyes met Roy's, steel-hard determination behind them. "That's exactly what they want. Our silence. They want us afraid. Quiet. Easier to pick off, one by one." A new voice broke through their conversation. Naomi Walker stepped forward from her car, notebook in hand, eyes sharp and focused. Naomi had grown up here but moved to Atlanta after college, returning now with a reputation for investigative reporting that rattled cages across the South. "I heard what happened," she announced firmly, scanning the gathered crowd. "This isn't isolated. 3 other farms in neighboring counties have faced the same harassment in the past month. Animals missing, vandalism, threatening notes, fires. Exactly like yours, Eli." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, expressions shifting from shock to anger, fear transforming to understanding. Eli nodded at Naomi, respect evident in his eyes. "This isn't intimidation," he said clearly to the community gathered around him. "This is a coordinated attack. They mean to push us out. Take what's ours." "But why now?" Miss Liza asked softly, her voice trembling slightly. "We've always minded our business, done nobody wrong." "Because land has value," Naomi answered gently. "And to them, our ownership of it is a threat. They're betting we're too afraid to fight back." "We shouldn't fight back," old Mr. Harris interjected firmly, his voice thick with authority. At 79, he commanded respect, but his eyes betrayed a lifetime of weary resignation. "Violence breeds more violence. We lived through those times before. We endured, and it passed. This too will pass." A tense silence filled the air, elders nodding solemnly, younger members shaking their heads fiercely, frustration clear in their eyes. Micah Tate stepped forward, fists clenched, eyes burning with youthful fury. At 17, he stood on the threshold between boyhood and manhood, eager and impatient. "Endure? How long should we keep enduring, Mr. Harris? Until there's nothing left of us, or this community." "Micah," Pastor Roy warned softly, sensing the tension. "Respect your elders." Micah's voice softened slightly. though his passion remained unshaken. "I mean, no disrespect, but aren't we tired of this? Of letting fear control our lives?" Voices rose, arguments flared, generations split down the middle, elders pleading caution and peace, youth demanding resistance and dignity. Eli listened carefully, taking it all in, feeling their collective pain and anger deep within his own bones. Finally, Eli raised a hand, quieting the voices with a calm authority that none questioned. His eyes scanned the crowd slowly, thoughtfully. "This land is more than dirt and crops," Eli said firmly, voice resonant, clear. "It's our past, our legacy, everything our ancestors endured, chains, oppression, hate. They endured so we could stand here today. I didn't fight wars overseas just to surrender now. Here, on the land my grandfather worked his life to own." Silence spread quickly through the group, each word carrying a powerful weight. "I understand wanting peace," Eli continued, voice unwavering, "but silence won't protect us anymore. We must prepare to defend ourselves, our homes, our families. Not violence for violence's sake, but strength for survival." Naomi nodded approvingly, scribbling notes as Eli spoke. "What do you suggest?" Pastor Roy asked hesitantly, his tone conflicted, yet hopeful. "Prepare our land defensively. Establish patrols. Organize communication," Eli answered calmly, a general giving orders. "We stand together, not one family alone, but united as one community." "I'll help," Micah volunteered immediately, youthful eagerness lighting his eyes. "So will I," another voice called from the crowd, followed by murmurs of agreement, voices growing louder, confidence spreading quickly among them. Miss Liza stepped forward slowly, her frail form strong with determination. "If we stand together, I believe we can survive this. We have before, we will again." Eli turned to her, warmth and gratitude briefly breaking through his disciplined exterior. "We will." Within hours, Eli had organized watch rotations, patrol schedules, and emergency communications. His farm became the strategic center, neighbors working together, cutting brush away from fences, laying defensive barriers, and preparing for what might come next. Night fell heavily once more, but Eli's land was no longer silent. Small groups moved quietly, patrolling perimeters, keeping watch in shifts. They whispered plans, exchanged encouragements, their collective strength growing stronger by the hour. Clara handed out warm meals, her presence calming, a quiet pillar of support. Standing watch at the fence line, rifle ready, Eli felt a surge of pride mixed with sorrow. Pride at their courage, sorrow that such courage was needed again. The lines had been drawn. The peace he once knew was lost, but in its place, something powerful had risen. Unity, resilience, resistance, and when trouble came again, they'd be ready. The next morning broke clear, the sun rising hot and sharp over Eli's land, painting golden streaks across freshly prepared defenses. Eli had barely slept, his mind still on high alert from the previous night's patrols and preparations. Neighbors had begun arriving early again, quietly reinforcing fence lines, setting tripwires hidden in tall grass, and positioning vehicles strategically to control access points. His farm had become more than a home. It had become a fortress, a community standing shoulder to shoulder. As midday approached, the stillness shattered. In the distance, the low rumble of engines drew closer, aggressive and unrelenting. Eli stood immediately, signaling Micah and several other young men into position near the main gate. Pastor Roy, Uncle Har, and several elders stood cautiously behind, watching, praying quietly, while Eli moved quickly, rifle slung deliberately across his shoulder, eyes scanning the horizon. 3 trucks barreled onto the property, tires tearing through the dirt, leaving trails of thick, choking dust. Each vehicle was full, masked men hanging out windows, jeering loudly, faces obscured beneath dark cloths, only their hateful eyes visible. The vehicles skidded to a halt in front of Eli's reinforced gate, engines growling like angry animals, clearly intending intimidation. Eli stepped forward calmly, but deliberately, stopping directly in their path, unafraid, eyes coolly assessing their every move. Caleb Knox stepped from the lead truck, pulling down his mask slightly, a twisted smile curving his lips. Behind him, two men dragged a crudely built wooden cross, tossing it onto the dirt as if claiming territory. "Thought we made ourselves clear, Briggs," Caleb shouted, voice full of venom. "Maybe you folks don't understand subtlety." "You made your point clear enough," Eli answered, voice firm, loud enough to carry, eyes locked coldly on Caleb's face. "And we answered clearly. This land isn't yours. Never was, never will be." Caleb laughed bitterly, glancing toward his men, his confidence bolstered by their numbers. "See, that's where you're wrong. It always belonged to us. You're just caretakers, temporary. And time's up." Eli's expression didn't change. His voice remained steady, calm, but steely. "This is your last chance, Knox. Leave peacefully, and don't come back." Caleb shook his head slowly, drawing a pistol and pointing it casually, almost mockingly, toward Eli's feet. "You really think you scare us? A washed-up old farmer? You don't know who you're dealing with." Eli replied softly, shifting his stance imperceptibly, feet grounded, muscles tensed, ready to react. "Oh, I think we do," Caleb sneered, signaling his men forward. The masked men surged forward suddenly, intending to overwhelm Eli and the others quickly. But Eli raised his hand swiftly, a silent signal. Instantly, the hidden wires snapped taut, causing attackers to stumble and fall heavily into concealed trenches, their shouts of confusion mingling with Caleb's furious curses. Before the attackers could recover, Eli moved. His movements were precise, swift, perfectly controlled, a lifetime of Delta Force training honed to a deadly efficiency. The first man swung wildly, a wooden club aimed recklessly. Eli sidestepped effortlessly, gripping the attacker's wrist, twisting it sharply until the man cried out, weapon dropping uselessly to the dirt. A quick shove sent him sprawling back, stunned and disarmed. Two more approached together, snarling viciously beneath their masks. Eli reacted instantly, dodging one's crude punch, grasping him by the collar, using momentum to send him crashing into his companion, both collapsing heavily onto the ground, tangled and humiliated. "Take your men and leave," Eli warned again, voice cold, authoritative, watching Caleb closely as others struggled to regain footing. Caleb spat bitterly onto the ground. "You'll regret this." Another wave charged, weapons raised, shouting obscenities, emboldened by rage and wounded pride. Eli moved with calculated calm, stepping smoothly into their blind spots, deflecting blows with minimal effort, redirecting attackers' momentum to leave them stumbling, embarrassed, and disoriented. Each humiliation chipped away at their bravado, sowing doubt, frustration, and fear. Micah and the others stood back, astonished and inspired, watching Eli, a force of calm amidst chaos, methodically dismantling the attacker's aggression without firing a single shot. "Is this the best you've got, Knox?" Eli challenged loudly, eyes blazing with controlled fury. "Men who stumble over their own hatred?" Caleb flushed crimson, rage visibly trembling in his clenched fists. "This isn't over, Briggs." "Oh, it is," Eli replied, steady and unyielding. "Right now." Eli stepped forward boldly, directly toward Caleb, who instinctively raised his weapon defensively. But Eli never hesitated, approaching fearlessly until mere inches separated them. Caleb's eyes widened briefly, uncertainty cracking through arrogance. "You shoot me now, and I guarantee you won't leave here alive," Eli warned quietly, voice low, dangerously calm. "I don't want bloodshed, Knox, but threaten my family, my community again, I'll stop being polite." Caleb's hand twitched on the pistol, a subtle tremor betraying the chaos behind his eyes. He hadn't expected this. A man who didn't flinch, didn't fold, didn't beg for mercy like others had. Around them, the fallen gang members groaned on the ground, humiliated and winded, their weapons scattered uselessly in the dirt. The Redthorns were not used to being resisted, and certainly not by a man who stood alone, without backup, without fear. But Caleb Knox wasn't about to back down in front of his crew. He couldn't. Not after Eli had dismantled half his men without firing a shot. With a sudden, vicious growl, Caleb dropped the pistol and lunged forward, shoulder lowered, aiming to drive Eli into the dirt by brute force. Eli didn't move. Not yet. At the last possible second, Eli pivoted hard on his back foot, redirecting Caleb's full momentum with a sidestep. Caleb went off balance, stumbling past, but managed to recover quickly, spinning around, his fist already swinging wide. It connected. A hard, clumsy blow across Eli's jaw that jerked his head to the side. Micah gasped, stepping forward instinctively, but Clara's hand gripped his shoulder. "Let him fight," she said softly. Eli didn't fall. Instead, he turned back slowly, the side of his mouth bloodied, but his eyes colder now, sharper. "That was your one," Eli muttered, voice low. He moved forward like a machine snapping into gear, smooth, controlled, brutal. His left hand shot out, palm open, catching Caleb's throat with the heel of his hand and driving him back. Caleb choked, stumbling, arms flailing. Eli followed, stepping into him with calculated force, delivering a sharp elbow to the ribs, then a sweeping leg kick that dropped Caleb hard to one knee. Before Eli could press the advantage, one of the Redthorns came up behind him with a metal pipe. Clara shouted, but Eli spun with lightning reflexes, catching the attacker mid-swing. He grabbed the pipe mid-air, twisting it violently from the man's grip, then flipped it underhanded and slammed the butt of it into the man's sternum. The attacker dropped, gasping, to the ground, winded and unable to rise. But the moment's distraction gave Caleb a window. He surged back to his feet and tackled Eli from behind, slamming both of them into the dirt with a grunt. Dust exploded into the air. The crowd watching cried out, some stepping forward, others too stunned to move. Caleb was strong, wild. He rained fists down, hammering Eli's shoulders and ribs with reckless fury. Eli grunted, blocking as many strikes as he could, but one caught his cheekbone hard, splitting the skin. Blood dripped freely now, but Eli's mind remained focused. He absorbed one more hit, then moved fast, striking upward with a powerful headbutt that dazed Caleb enough to shift their positions. Eli reversed their momentum, flipping Caleb off him with a practiced sweep of his leg and rolling quickly to straddle him. Elbows, fists, and sharp jabs rained down with methodical precision, each one meant to debilitate, not kill. Caleb screamed and bucked violently, his face bloody now, eyes swelling shut. But Eli didn't stop until he saw the fight draining from the man's limbs. Still breathing heavy, Eli stood, chest heaving, sweat and blood painting his face. His eyes scanned the field, but it wasn't over. 3 more men rushed him at once, one wielding a bat, another with a length of chain, the third with bare fists and wild eyes. Micah and the other young men started forward, but again Eli raised a hand, motioning them back. "I've got it," he barked. The one with the bat swung first. A wild horizontal slash meant to break ribs. Eli ducked low, stepped inside the arc of the swing, and slammed his knee into the man's gut. As the bat dropped, Eli snatched it mid-fall and turned, swinging upward in a short arc that cracked against the second attacker's wrist, disarming the chain and sending it flying. The third man lunged, fists flying in a windmill fury, but Eli absorbed the first few glancing blows, then struck with military precision. A palm strike to the nose, a hook to the side of the jaw, and a finishing shove that sent the man backward into the dust. Panting now, bruised, and bleeding from 2 spots on his face, Eli stood alone in the silence that followed. The red thorns lay sprawled around him, groaning, broken, their arrogance shattered on the field they thought they could claim. Micah stepped forward finally. eyes wide with pride and awe. "They came ready to burn us down," Micah said, voice hoarse. Eli wiped the blood from his lip and nodded slowly. "And they left in pieces." Caleb struggled to rise, coughing blood, crawling toward his gun like a dog chasing its last chance. Eli walked slowly over and kicked the weapon away, then leaned down close. "You bring this violence to my door again," Eli said coldly, "and I won't just humiliate you. I'll bury this whole rotten thing you call a movement." Caleb's breath rasped, but he didn't reply. His face was swollen, his pride broken. His men lay behind him, scattered and silent. Eli straightened slowly, feeling the deep, dull ache of battle in his muscles, the adrenaline ebbing away as reality flooded back. He glanced around the field, now silent except for the distant groans of defeated men and the harsh breathing of the neighbors who'd witnessed something they would never forget. Micah stood nearby, still stunned and wide-eyed with admiration, barely able to hide his excitement and pride. "We did it," the boy murmured softly, his voice tinged with disbelief. "We beat 'em back. Nobody ever beat 'em before." Eli turned toward Micah, placing a firm hand on the younger man's shoulder. "We're not done yet, Micah. This was just one battle, not the whole war." Before Micah could reply, the low hum of an approaching engine broke the fragile silence. Eyes turned, cautious again, as Sheriff Gentry Cobb's patrol car rolled slowly down the driveway, tires crunching deliberately on the gravel like a slow, inevitable threat. The sheriff stepped out casually, thumbs hooked in his belt loops, aviators reflecting the glare of the midday sun. His expression was unreadable beneath that mirrored glass, a careful mask of authority hiding secrets Eli had long suspected. Cobb took his time surveying the scene, studying each fallen member of the Red Thorns with detached interest, before finally turning his attention to Eli. "You've had yourself quite a morning, Briggs," Cobb remarked dryly, his voice thick with forced casualness. He removed his sunglasses slowly, folding them deliberately into his shirt pocket. "I'd appreciate it if you'd explain exactly what happened here." Eli didn't blink, didn't shift his stance. "You know exactly what happened here, Sheriff. You just arrived late enough to miss the worst of it." Sheriff Cobb's jaw tightened slightly, annoyance flickering briefly in his eyes. He moved closer, ignoring Micah and the others who stood protectively around Eli. Cobb's gaze settled on Eli's injuries, noting the blood and bruises with mild satisfaction. "You know," Cobb said, lowering his voice, conspiratorial but clearly threatening, "a smarter man might see this as an opportunity to make peace. We've got enough trouble around here without you stirring the pot." "I didn't stir anything," Eli responded coldly. "Your friends brought violence to my land, my community. You planning on arresting them or just lecturing me?" Cobb smirked faintly, glancing dismissively toward the scattered gang members now climbing weakly into their trucks, retreating quietly with heads bowed. "Misunderstanding, Briggs. Tempers flare. Mistakes get made. I'm sure nobody meant any permanent harm." Micah's eyes widened, his fists clenching at his sides. Eli caught the young man's movement and placed a calming hand back on his shoulder, warning him silently to hold his anger for now. "You calling this a misunderstanding?" Eli asked, voice sharp and cutting. "You saw that cross they brought, Sheriff. You're really going to pretend you don't understand exactly what's happening here?" Cobb's eyes narrowed slightly, irritation showing more clearly. "Careful now, Eli. Accusations without proof get dangerous fast. Best to let this go. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The threat hung heavy in the air, unspoken but clear as daylight. Eli stepped closer, deliberately invading the sheriff's personal space, eyes blazing quietly. Cobb stiffened instinctively, hand edging toward the holster at his hip. "Harder?" Eli echoed softly, dangerously. "You think this could possibly get harder?" "They came to burn us down, Sheriff. Where were you when they lit up my barn? Where were you when they threatened families in our own community? You're not here to protect us. You're here to keep us quiet. But I'm done being quiet." Cobb stared back fiercely, resentment bubbling beneath his carefully controlled expression. "Watch yourself, Briggs. You've got people depending on you. You push too far, It's them who'll pay the price. You threatening my community now, Sheriff? Eli's voice was low, icy, carrying clearly to everyone present. No, Cobb answered calmly, reining himself in with practiced control, stepping back slowly toward his patrol car. I'm advising caution, for your sake. And theirs. Be smart, Eli. Let this settle quietly. Because next time, I might not be around to defuse things. Cobb placed his sunglasses back on, climbing into his car without another word, slamming the door and driving away with calculated indifference. The dust settled slowly behind him, leaving Eli and the others standing quietly, stunned by the blatant threat from a man sworn to protect them. Micah finally exhaled shakily, eyes still wide, voice trembling slightly with anger and frustration. We can't just let him do this, Eli. He's as bad as they are. Eli nodded slowly, expression hardening with resolve. We're not letting anything go, but we're not playing their game either. If Cobb won't help us, we find another way. We don't beg for protection. We build our own. He turned back toward the community gathered near him, watching with quiet hope and determination, their eyes reflecting newfound strength and resolve. From now on, we patrol in shifts, around the clock. We document everything that happens, every threat, every attack, every face, every vehicle. Naomi's already working on getting our story out. But until then, we protect each other. Heads nodded slowly, murmurs of agreement spreading quietly but steadily. Pastor Roy stepped forward, gently laying a hand on Eli's shoulder. We trust you, Eli, Roy said quietly. If you say stand, we stand. Eli glanced back gratefully, feeling the immense weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, familiar, yet heavier now than any combat zone he'd faced overseas. Clara moved quietly beside Eli, gently threading her fingers through his, squeezing softly. They'll come back stronger, won't they? Eli sighed softly, pulling her closer, grounding himself in her quiet strength. Yes, but this time, we'll be ready. And the next time they try, we won't be alone. Everyone here is ready to stand. As afternoon shadows lengthened over Eli's battered fields, quiet determination settled deeply over the community. Preparations resumed immediately. Fortifications rebuilt. Patrols reorganized. Strategies planned with renewed intensity. War had arrived openly now, disguised as hate, greed, and intimidation. But Eli Briggs knew battles. He knew sacrifice, courage, and what it took to lead in times of uncertainty. And if this was war, then Eli would lead his community through it, to victory, peace, and the justice they all deserved. In the days following Sheriff Cobb's thinly veiled warning, Eli knew better than to trust silence. A lull didn't mean peace. It meant the enemy was regrouping, waiting, preparing their next move. The Red Thorns had been humiliated, their pride shattered, and Eli knew enough about war to understand that wounded pride was a dangerous fuel for retaliation. Within a week, the calm erupted into chaos. It began subtly: cut fences, damaged irrigation lines, tire slashes on parked vehicles, but soon escalated dramatically. The enemy struck with calculated cruelty. Intent on breaking spirits, they scattered nails in driveways, poisoned livestock feed, and shattered windows in the dead of night. Worse still, reports filtered in from neighbors about masked figures intimidating children walking home from school, shouting threats and slurs from passing trucks. Eli's community found themselves under siege, their quiet rural life shattered by aggression, designed to terrorize and divide them. Naomi Walker diligently documented each act, her voice growing louder through her stories. But local authorities, led by Cobb's deliberate neglect, remained deafeningly silent. Officially, nothing was happening. Unofficially, the community was being methodically dismantled piece by piece. Determined not to let despair gain a foothold, Eli focused on turning his farm into a haven. Each morning began early, with Eli leading groups of neighbors through defensive training, lessons drawn directly from his military past. Teens like Micah eagerly absorbed every technique, learning to patrol quietly, spot subtle signs of intrusion, and how to organize and communicate effectively under pressure. Men and women alike learned self-defense, building confidence in their ability to protect their homes and families. "We're not soldiers," Micah remarked breathlessly after one intense training session, wiping sweat from his forehead. "No, you're not," Eli responded firmly, eyes scanning the tired yet determined faces around him. "But you're warriors, because you've chosen to defend something worth fighting for. Warriors fight smarter, not just harder." During a twilight patrol, Eli found Micah waiting anxiously by the fence line. Tension tight in the young man's jaw. Micah's eyes glittered with anger and frustration, fingers gripping the fence so tightly they trembled. "They scared my little sister yesterday," Micah whispered bitterly, voice thick with emotion. "Chased her home. Shouted things I can't repeat." "How do we fight hate like that, Eli?" Eli stood beside him silently for a moment, the weight of Micah's pain settling heavily on his own heart. Finally, he placed a steady hand on Micah's shoulder, meeting his gaze evenly. "By never letting them make us like them," Eli replied quietly. "They fight with cruelty, fear, intimidation. We fight with strength, discipline, and unity. That's why we'll win." Micah drew a deep breath, steadying himself, resolve returning to his young eyes. "I'm ready, Eli. Whatever it takes." Eli nodded solemnly, pride clear in his voice. "I know." At night, the farm took on the disciplined atmosphere of a military camp. Eli established defensive rotations, each group assigned specific watch shifts and routes. Neighbors exchanged walkie